I'd also like to then jump right into the subject matter, and that is compare the advantages and disadvantages of starting with either approved finished dosage forms as starting ingredients compared to APIs. I know we've all heard Dr. Allen speak for years and years and years on the virtue and superiority of using APIs to compound, and we'll revisit some of that thinking here in this presentation. And then finally, I'd like to leave you with some tools maybe to help you decide which components you're going to use when you're preparing veterinary compounded preparations. Are you going to start with approved products, or are you going to start with what FDA calls bulk drug substances? And forgive me if I call them that, because that's the legal lingo, but they are active pharmaceutical ingredients. So here we go. So here's the question. Can we use APIs for veterinary compounding? Well, the short answer is unequivocally yes, you can, and FDA realizes this. However, in 1996, as I mentioned, the yes became a complicated yes, and there became some legal considerations after the passage of the Animal Medicinal Drug Use Clarification Act in 1996. And prior to 1996, again, I won't do a deep dive into veterinary law evolution here because it's days and days and days of not so exciting material. But before 1996, from 1968 to 1996, veterinarians were forced to use drugs only if they were approved by FDA and only exactly as labeled by the approved product labeling. That meant that they couldn't use human drugs in animals, which really left a huge gap in their therapeutic toolkit. They couldn't use a dog drug in a cat. They couldn't use a drug labeled for dogs at a higher or longer dose and duration than was on the label. And so it created all kinds of problems, and veterinarians lobbied Congress hard starting in 1994 until AMDUCA, as it's come to be known, was passed and enacted in 1996. There were quite a few stakeholders involved, as you can imagine. There were veterinarians, there were pharmacies, there was the Animal Health Institute, which is the equivalent of veterinary pharma, the veterinary manufacturers, and they all had concerns about what was going into this law and how it would affect compounding. So the bottom line was, this was a law that allowed extra label use of approved drugs. Well, APIs are not approved by FDA, so therefore they have no label. So the law is actually silent on bulk drug substances because these substances do not have a label. But the actual language of the law is silent. It neither prohibits nor permits the use of bulk drug substances because it's considered out of scope of the law, and they didn't want to muddy it up by mentioning something that was out of scope. FDA understands, however, they did in 1996, and almost 25 years later, they still understand that compounding from bulks is medically necessary for veterinarians to be able to take care of their patients in their best medical judgment. And so they have to come up with some guidance for veterinarians and pharmacists compounding for animals to be able to do that. But the bottom line is that FDA's position is that compounds prepared from bulks are new animal drugs, and they're subject to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. They are not exempt like human compounds are from the labeling requirements, the approval requirements, or having to be made under GMP. So those are three very onerous requirements for compounding for animals to be considered legally acceptable by FDA. So here we are. The first guidance tool that they came up with was in 1996. It was Compliance Policy Guide 608-400, which in my opinion, having lived through all of these guidances and changes, this one was actually the best one. It was the most rational. It told you exactly which conditions that FDA would likely enforce regulatory action. There were some weak links in it. I've highlighted those in red. They have been challenged in the courts since 1996 when this was first put out there. But all in all, I think the general thinking behind this was pretty good and pretty solid, and represented what FDA really wanted to do to protect human public health and animal health as well. But the limitations were the anticipation clause. What is an inordinate amount? We still don't know what that is. Commercial scale manufacturing equipment, is that, a 300 count capsule machine, or is that somebody who can make 10,000 mini tabs in an hour? That's very vague and hard to put a thumb on. And then the whole issue of office use, which they never used the word. They talked about compounding drugs for third parties who resell those compounds to individual patients. And that's what we know is office use, which now is considered legal in most states for animal compounding. And there are provisions in many states which allow pharmacies to sell compounds to veterinarians who then redispense those to go home with patients under certain circumstances. So that's not relevant anymore. The one that still makes me laugh is number 4, that FDA actually listed a phone number that you could call to say, Mother, may I? FDA, may I have permission to compound potassium bromide for this dog? And I think they realized very quickly how overwhelming that was, and they changed that. So that went along pretty well, and then start all the battles in the courts after the implementation of the Food and Drug Modernization Act, FDAMA, on the human side. And those court changes caused some changes in the actual CPG off and on until 2013, when the Drug Quality and Security Act was passed, and there was a statutory set of requirements for compounding for humans. Originally, animals were supposed to be in the DQSA as well, companion animals, not food-producing animals. But you can imagine that different stakeholders got involved. It got too complicated for Congress to try to bridge the gap between humans and animals, and so it is just relevant to humans. Well, that created some problems. There is a huge disconnect between human compounding and companion animal compounding. And so FDA had to rescind their compliance policy guide in 2015. But simultaneously, they came out with another one, Guidance for Industry, or GFI number 230, which was very closely modeled after DQSA. It almost is like they cut and pasted some of the regulatory provisions for DQSA and then just inserted the word animal instead of humans, and veterinarian for physician, et cetera, et cetera. So they put that out there in May of 2015, had a public comment period, which was originally 90 days. It went to 120 days, and then it went to 180 days because everybody could not agree on whether this was the way to go about providing guidance for compounding with bulk drug substances for animals. When they finally did close the public comment period, the public comments were overwhelming. None of the stakeholders could agree on what would make their industry happy. And so FDA went back to the drawing board. They revoked it in November of 2017, and they met with different stakeholders for the next 2 years. And then they tried it again in 2019. They put out GFI number 256, and they sort of abandoned the DQSA approach, which I think was a good idea. But they did hold on to the use of lists, both positive and negative lists, which is very problematic in veterinary medicine. We've talked about the diversity of patients and the diversity of practice, and some are food animals, some are pets, some are family members, and it just gets very, very, very difficult to come up with single lists that accommodate all needs. So what they did is they divided 256 into 3 different sets of patient types. One would be individual prescriptions for companion animals, and there are a few restrictions for that. They've actually left that alone for the most part. They're targeting office use for companion animals, and they have restricted that by positive and negative list. And then the thing that is very sad to me is that they completely limited compounding with bulk substances for any food-producing species, not a patient that is just intended to be eaten, but just by definition of its species, it cannot have any compounds prepared with bulk drug substances. So, for example, my pet chickens, who are nothing but pets, could never receive a medication prepared for bulk drug substances if that's what they needed. And so I think that probably needs a little bit of work. Kind of counterintuitively, they did allow for poisoned food producing animals to receive antidotes prepared by bulk drug substances, which would obviously save that food producing animal's life from the poison. But then what do you do with them? Can they be a food producing animal? You save their life, but is the poison really gone? So counterintuitive. I've done lecture after lecture on this, and we don't need to spend any more time on it. We will see what happens. AVMA strongly opposes positive list. They may support negative lists. We don't know. They put several comments out there. AVMA tells me that the final guidance is probably going to be put out there by the end of this year. We'll see. We've heard that before, but I'm looking forward to seeing whatever they came up with. Bottom line is, here in late 2021, compounding with approved products is the only legal option for compounding for animals, and that's problematic. This is the group I'm going to focus on today. I'm not going to talk about office use. I'm not going to talk about food producing species. I'm only going to talk about individual prescriptions for companion animals, because that's where the playing field is wide open. So we can only legally compound with approved products. Well, what are some of the challenges with those approved products? There are two big ones. The first one is that the universe of available products that you can start with is big and kind of murky. First of all, there's human approved drugs. Because they're approved by FDA, they do have labels. And so you can use those as starting ingredients. There are about 20,000 prescription drugs in the Orange Book, and then countless others that are regulated by OTC monographs. They are not fully approved by FDA, so to speak, but there are lots and lots of drugs out there that you could start with. Then there are veterinary only approved drugs, and you can find those in the Animal Drugs at FDA website, or the Green Book, as it's been known for many years. And in the Green Book, you'll find a list of all the approved products for veterinary medicine. There are fully approved drugs, and you can tell if something is fully approved because it will have a 6-digit new animal drug application number on the label. So if you're not sure if a product you're starting with, the compound, is legit, look at that NADA number and look it up in the Green Book. If there's not a matchup and you don't find it, then that's not truly an approved product. NDC numbers do not do it. It has to be an NADA number. Well, there are about 2,200 new animal drug products, different products in the Green Book, and there are about 642 unique active ingredients. So that's not quite as many as on the human side, but it's a fair amount of drugs. Then FDA also does something called conditional approval of drugs. And those are drugs that have proven safety, but haven't quite finished proving efficacy. And so they have 5 years total, 1 year at a time, to prove efficacy, and they can be legally marketed. There are 3 of those right now. And then FDA also has this process that's almost like an orphan drug. They're called indexed drugs. They can only be used in what FDA calls minor species. So that's like salmon, ferrets, not dogs, not cats, not cows, not pigs, not turkeys, not chickens, but minor species. And an FDA advisory panel, review panel, looks at these applications and decides if they are can be assumed to be reasonably safe and effective when used in minor species according to the product labeling. They are legally marketed. Their exclusivity is actually protected under law by FDA. You can't try to compound or copy one of these, but you can use one to start with if you're compounding. And there are currently 14 of those. Are you seeing where we're going here? This is just a quagmire. Then there is, in the universe of available products for veterinary medicine, unapproved drugs. And that is any product that is none of the previous three categories. And the last time FDA looked at this, it's been about 10 years, but there were 4,500 unapproved animal drugs currently marketed. There are a lot of reasons for this. I won't go into it. A lot of them are grandfathered and kind of predate the 1968 Animal Drug Amendment. Many of them are just marketed because FDA doesn't have the resources to go after them. And so there are a lot of drugs out there posing as approved veterinary products, but they aren't. So technically, it would be illegal to start with these to use as compounded ingredients. FDA also throws compounds prepared from bulk drug substances into that bucket of unapproved drugs. So you couldn't use a compound from somebody else or from yourself to make another compound, and that would be considered technically illegal under the current rules. And then there's this new category, veterinary 503B outsourcing facilities are really getting into the action for providing compounds, outsourced compounds to veterinary practices. And because 503Bs were born after AMDUCA, it's not really clear where they fit into the scheme of things. The one thing that is clear is that because 503B drugs are exempt from labeling requirements for fully approved FDA drugs, they have no label, and so therefore they don't qualify for extra label use. So I've not seen FDA opine on this officially, but my guess is that they would rule that these are they don't qualify for extra label use under AMDUCA because they don't have a legitimate label. Okay, the second big challenge is availability of approved veterinary drugs to non-veterinarians. This is a big problem. I'm sure many of you have run square up against this. On the veterinary side, they restrict sales and distribution of their products to only licensed veterinarians and veterinary distributors. They will not sell to pharmacies and human wholesalers on the surface. Now, some of them do under the radar, but their general kind of model is to not do that. And interestingly, along with those sales to distributors, they have a lot of restrictive agreements that the distributor or wholesaler that they're selling them to won't sell their competitor products. So I'll sell you this, but you can't sell that if I do. And so, number one, that locks pharmacies out of the loop completely. But number two, if a veterinarian tries to get these products and then sells them to a pharmacy so that they can compound in a technically legal fashion, then that puts that veterinarian or that distributor at risk of becoming, first of all, they'll lose their contract with the manufacturer because they don't want these drugs getting into the hands of pharmacists. Or that veterinarian may move themselves squarely into the ballpark called wholesaling and fall into a whole new tax bracket and regulatory bracket. And so it gets to be really, really difficult. So there are some secondary distribution schemes that have popped up. There are big sales of these products that may sit in pods out in uncontrolled climate conditions for long periods of time. Really, we don't know unless there is a veterinarian involved what the quality of those drugs are. And because this is such a big issue, the Federal Trade Commission examined it in 2015 and they haven't come back to it yet. I hope they will, but they concluded that restricted distribution in this case may be justified for safety reasons because pharmacists are not educated in veterinary pharmacology. And so they do have an argument there, but we're trying our best to change that. So the bottom line is most pharmacies can't even obtain veterinary only drugs. So it's a catch-22 if you're trying to use approved products to compound for animals. So where does that leave us? Technically legal veterinary compounding must use only approved drug products, but there are many products out there that are unapproved. And those approved products are not accessible to pharmacies, and secondary distribution of those is risky. You don't know what you're getting, and it may result in poor quality. And so, and as Dr. Allen has said for many, many, many years, there are many advantages to using APIs over approved substances anyway. Some of those, I'll just skim the surface here. I think Eric did a great job with his talk yesterday about the quality assurance for APIs, but for APIs, they have a known purity and strength because we have a certificate of analysis for that batch of API. Have you ever tried to get a certificate of analysis or a batch record for a manufactured drug? Ain't gonna happen. APIs generally have tighter strength requirements. Through a USP substance monograph, their strength may be restricted to plus or minus 1.5 to as much as 3%, but not much more than that. And so you know exactly what you're starting with. You have a much tighter strength range there. They're excipient free. There may be some impurities, but you're going to know what those are on the certificate of analysis, and they have to meet specifications of the monograph. You know the particle size. I think Dr. K talked about particle size yesterday and how that could really impact the stability of a product over time. If you know what you're starting with for particle size, you know whether or not it's safe to be used in an ophthalmic preparation or not. And it gives you exact weighable quantities for narrow therapeutic index drugs, meaning that I'm within that 1.5 to 3% strength range for what I'm starting with, and there are no excipients and no variations in that actual product that I may not even know about because I don't have access to the batch records. So APIs are about the purest thing you can start with. Manufactured drugs, on the other hand, we don't know their exact strength. There may be a USP monograph plus or minus 10% generally, but that's if there is a monograph. We'll talk about that in just a minute. There are quite a few veterinary drugs on the market, but only a small handful have a USP monograph to tell you what the strength restrictions are. As we know, and we've heard from multiple speakers, there are lots and lots of different excipients in approved products that can really mess up the quality of a compound, and those vary from generic to generic. You don't necessarily know what you're getting in terms of excipients, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more too. And if it's a finished dosage form, you're going to have to fractionate it or open a capsule or something to achieve the needed quantity, and that may be difficult to do. So now we'll get into kind of the meat of making the choices. How do we decide whether we're going to use an approved product or an API? Well, I'll call these, they're not as good as Tom's tips or Ralph's rules that you heard yesterday, but I'm going to call these Gigi's guesses because this is not as an exact science as you can imagine. But the first question I like to ask myself is there a compendial compounded preparation monograph for this formulation? If there is a USP monograph, for example, for this preparation, then I feel pretty confident that I can legally get away with using whatever is listed in the monograph. There are lots of FDA folks that sit in on USP committees, and so they know when USP has said you have to use a certain substance in a monograph to ensure quality and stability. So if it says to use an API, then you can do it. If it says to use an approved product, then you should try to do it. If there's not a USP monograph, then determine whether or not a peer-reviewed formula exists. If there's a peer-reviewed formula, then use what's in that peer-reviewed formula. You can be pretty confident of the quality and the stability if it's a good study, if you stick with that and you have justification for doing so. And if there's not a peer-reviewed formula, then you have to get down to the nitty-gritty of deciding, is there an approved product available or not that can help you compound this? So does it exist? Does an approved product exist to make this compound? Yes, there are some approved products out there. If the answer is yes, then you have to ask more questions. Does it meet the following? Can this dosage form be manipulated to accurately make the compound that I need to make? Can I split the tablet? Can I open the capsule? Is there too little strength of drug in the dosage form that's approved to make the compound I need? Does it contain any excipients that my patient can't tolerate or might make the preparation unstable? For example, does it contain xylitol? Many of the orally dissolving tablets have xylitol, so they would not be suitable starting ingredients for dogs because xylitol is very toxic to dogs. Is the drug a narrow therapeutic index drug? If I don't know what I'm starting with, and it's a narrow therapeutic index drug, it's plus or minus 10%, or I don't even know because there's no stated monograph for some veterinary drugs. It makes me a little nervous. I don't know what strength I'm going to end up with. Does it have a USP product monograph so I can at least estimate the strength and impurity limits in the approved product? And as I mentioned earlier, there are 2,200 or so approved veterinary products. But there are only 180 USP veterinary product monographs. And I have been in conferences where AHI members have stood up and said, why would they give a monograph to USP so that people could copy their products? So this is, I don't think that situation is going to get better. We can't rely on USP monographs for veterinary products because they're just not out there and they're just not coming in. And then, as I mentioned, do I even have access to the approved product? If there's one out there, great, but what kind of hoops am I going to have to jump through to get it? And what is the quality if I can get it? If all of the answers to those questions are no, then you have to consider the API. Again, the trick here is to document your thinking and work consistently through this decision tree every time so that you have a defense for what you're doing. So I'm going to take that decision tree and I'm going to work through some clinical examples. These are very simplified, but it's just to serve as a point of illustration and maybe to get you thinking about some questions you might have at the end of this presentation. So let's look at prescription for mirtazapine, 10 milligrams per mil oral suspension. Veterinarian has sent you a prescription for 12 mils of that for a cat. Is there a compendial monograph? Well, actually, yes. USP has a compounded preparation monograph for mirtazapine 10 milligram per mil oral suspension, and it actually uses an approved product. It uses the Mylan version of the 30 milligram mirtazapine tablets. Most of us are going to have access to that, so the answer to that is yes. Is the product appropriate for this particular patient? Well, this is a cat, and so I'm going to look at the inactive ingredients. And this is what I'm going to do, Mylan's 30 milligram mirtazapine. I'm going to kind of cruise through this list, and I don't see anything scary on there for cats. The dyes are not azo dyes. It's polyethylene glycol, not propylene glycol. So I think the answer to this question is yes. That one would be appropriate to use the mirtazapine 30 milligram tablets to make this suspension. The next one is clomipramine, 1 milligram per mil oral suspension. The veterinarian would like for you to prepare 20 mils of that for a bird. And so you look in USP, your compounding compendium, is there a monograph? Yes, there happens to be one. Does it use an approved product? In this case, it does. It uses the veterinary clomipramine 20 milligram tablets as the starting ingredients. Do I have access to the approved product? Well, that's where it gets tricky. I probably more than likely do not have access to the clomicalm. If I do, then I can be confident that the stability and the quality is there, but I may not have access to it. But I can get the human clomipramine 25 milligram capsules. So I'm going to look, just like I did for the mirtazapine, and I'm going to look at the inactives in those clomipramine 25 milligram capsules, and I'm going to kind of cruise down the list. This is for a bird, and any of you that have bird patients know that they can be very fussy in terms of sensitivity to all kinds of impurities, to dyes, to different solvents and surfactants. So I'm looking down the list here. I see a lot of azo dyes there. I see ferric oxide. How much iron can a bird handle? I see propylene glycol. I see titanium dioxide. I just see some things here that make me a little nervous about jumping to that for a bird. So in this case, I probably would be more comfortable using an API if I could not get the Clomicalm 20 milligram tablets. One option might be to get that bird owner to get a prescription from the veterinarian and have them dispense clomipramine 20 milligram tablets to that owner to bring to you to reformulate. But that depends on what state you're in. Some boards of pharmacy don't like that. It gets really, really, really tricky. So this would be a case where I would consider using the API. The downside is you're going to have to figure out how to weigh out 20 milligrams of this. So you've got to have a scale that can accommodate that minimum weighable quantity, or you're going to have to make some to throw out. But those are some options here. Here's another one, enrofloxacin, which is a veterinary-only fluoroquinolone, 20 milligram per mil oral suspension, 30 mils for a dog. There is a compendial monograph. It does not use the approved product, and I can tell you why, and that's because the approved product results in an unstable preparation. As Dr. K mentioned yesterday, some of the excipients can promote destabilizing factors. In my personal experience, I have found that the film coating on Zoetis, which is the veterinary equivalent of Pfizer products, really causes problems with the stability of preparations over time. The marbofloxacin, which is another veterinary fluoroquinolone, if you use the approved product for that, the film coating causes, it begins to smell like rotten oysters in about 24 hours. And it has all kinds of impurities starting to spike and degradants starting to spike on the chromatograph. So in this case, the USP monograph uses the API instead of the tablets. There is an approved product, yes, but for reasons I just explained, it's not a suitable choice. So we're going to use the API in this case. Methimazole, 5 milligram per 0.1 mil transdermal gel. We need 5 mils of that for a cat that's hyperthyroid. Is there a monograph for this? No, there's not one, unfortunately. Is there a stable peer-reviewed formula? Yes, there is. There's actually several of those published. Does this transdermal formula use the approved product, which would be tablets? No, they do not, because that would not be a suitable preparation for transdermal absorption. There is an approved product, but as I said, it would not be suitable. And so in this case, we are going to use the API, and I think FDA would certainly be in agreement that this is the best way to prepare this particular formulation. This is a little bit of an unusual one, and I hate to even bring up ivermectin right now because it's so controversial, but this is for dogs, and this product, the unflavored ivermectin tablets are frequently on back order. And if you have a food allergic dog, you are somewhat out of options for heartworm prevention. So this is a common request that compounders may get for veterinary compounds. There's not a monograph to make a 68 microgram unflavored capsule. There's not a peer-reviewed formula. There are approved products, but the 68 microgram tablets are on short. They're not available right now. There's a 10,000 microgram per mil injection. And then there's a 3,000 microgram, and I apologize, in the set that I posted for your notes, it says milligrams, but it's actually microgram oral tablet. So is the approved product appropriate for this compound for this patient? Well, I would probably start with the human 3,000 microgram oral tablet, just because it's easier to compound with. I'm going to have less waste. And it is starting with the approved product. And we did this for several years while the unflavored heartworm preventatives were on back order. And we seem to have no problems and no heartworm positive dogs at the end of that. So this is a case where I would try to use the human approved product to make this. The injection is liquid, obviously. That's going to be problematic in a capsule, and it's way too concentrated for this strength. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of what kind of thought process you can go through for choosing whether to do an API or an approved product. Now I'm going to give you some general considerations. Again, Eric Tosh did a fabulous job on this yesterday about ensuring the quality and the supply chain, but we're going to talk about stuff that's a little simpler and more generic. Use the USP-NF grade of the substance if possible. Veterinary medicine is, here's the tricky part. USP gets its strength from the rule of law, which for compounding is DQSA, which is humans only. FDA has called out the USP compounding chapters 795 and 797 in their compounding guidance for using bulk drug substances for animals. So it's a little bit hazy as to whether or not you absolutely have to start with the USP grade substance for animal patients. But if you can't find one, if there isn't one, and some good examples of that would be trilostane does not have a USP monograph. Marbofloxacin does not have a USP monograph. They're working on one, but you can try to get a compendial grade from another world compendia. The links to these places are on the bottom of the slide, but you can get trilostane EP, you can get marbofloxacin BP. Those have gone through compendial and met compendial requirements in other countries. So that would be kind of your second choice if there wasn't a USP grade substance. You need to try to purchase them from an FDA registered supplier. Eric pointed out what those are and what that means yesterday. I've supplied the link where you can check and see if that supplier is currently registered with FDA. You can see when they were last inspected. One thing that I will mention, and I hope most of you are aware of this, is, and again, this is not in your slide deck, my apologies, I can make this updated slide deck available. The FDA import alerts, you need to be aware of those. You can reach them on this link and look and see if the supplier you're going to use is red listed. Red listed means FDA has put a stop on anything that comes into this country from that supplier, and they don't even have to do a physical inspection. It's just dead in the water in customs as soon as they see that return address on there. Obviously, there are some issues with quality from those red listed suppliers, but in a more pragmatic sense, you're going to lose your money because you pay that supplier to get that API to you, and you lose your money because it gets stuck in customs and it gets destroyed. And so really make sure you're aware of the red list. Some of those folks actually might make it to the green list, which is they're accepted. And I don't want to get into too much detail about the FDA import alert system, but you can subscribe to weekly emails and find out what the weekly imports are and what the red list folks are and avoid them if you can. If you do get an API, you just absolutely must have an accompanying certificate of analysis. That is required for human compounding. It's required in the USP chapters. It's a really good idea to have one anyway, regardless of what standards you're using to compound. That lists all of the information Eric went through yesterday, the physical characteristics, the purity and identity, endotoxin levels, strength, potency, so you know exactly what you're dealing with, what country it came from, the manufacturing date, the batch date, and the expiration date. It's really good information to have. It's important to pay attention to the salt form. That is one thing that I have found is not very consistent in veterinary medicine. They may be talking about prednisolone, and they could be talking about prednisolone base or prednisolone acetate or prednisolone sodium phosphate. And they use those terms interchangeably. The dosing for that substance may be based on just the base, or it may be based on the salt. And a good example of that is metronidazole, which is based on metronidazole itself dosing. And metronidazole benzoate, as we know, is 1.6 times heavier in molecular weight than metronidazole hydrochloride. So you have to do some conversions there to provide an equivalent dose. So make sure you know what salt form you're getting. We'll talk about salt forms a little bit more at the end of the presentation in terms of salts that are not therapeutically active. So you really need to make sure that you're paying attention to the salt. You need to pay attention to waters of hydration. If they're listed in the formula, and then if you're substituting API ingredients based on what you can get for that formula, you really need to pay attention to and convert the waters of hydration. There were several cardioplegia solutions floating around in veterinary medicine about 10 years ago. And the veterinary cardiologist who put those together just listed the salt, or excuse me, the base form in the formula. And it turned out that several of the different schools were using different waters of hydration. Some were using monohydrate, some were using heptahydrate, some were using pentahydrate. And that made a huge difference in how that cardioplegia performed when they put that organ into it. So make sure you look at waters of hydration and convert appropriately for that. Make sure you can weigh it. If your scale doesn't go that low, then you may have to buy or prepare tritrates or dilutions of that particular substance. And then a new concept that USP has come up with in its list of resources. This is not USP's concept. This is a pharma concept that's been around for a long, long time. But it might be useful to look at the biopharmaceutics classification system to see how easy that API is to work with. And its limitation, its big limitation is that it's only for humans. The system is based in human GI absorption and bioavailability. But it's a good place to start because it categorizes those drugs into to their solubility and their bioavailability. Class 1 drugs are the best candidates for formulation. They're highly soluble and highly bioavailable, so you're likely to get a consistent product if you're trying to work with something that is commercially available in another dosage form. Class 4 is the most difficult. They require nanoparticles and all kinds of excipients and surfactants and specialized systems. And then classes 2 and 3 are somewhere in between. So this is new on the radar. Expect more on this, but it's something to kind of pay attention to and do a deep dive in later on. And here they are with some examples of what drugs might fit in that class. And there's some surprises down in class 4. I would not have expected ciprofloxacin to be that difficult to work with, but it is listed as a class 4 in many references. So when not to choose an API, I think this is kind of intuitive. FDA has always, and pharma has always been very sensitive and will come after people for compounding copies of commercially available approved drugs solely for economic reasons. The ones I see most commonly copied in the veterinary world are chlorambucil 2 milligram doses, itraconazole 100 milligram doses, mustargen or mechlorethamine 10 milligram. It's really not worth the risk to the patient or to your license to copy these. It is something that I would definitely step away from. If you compound with a different salt form of the API that's in the commercially available product, oclacitinib, Apoquel, is a drug that is just a miracle drug for atopic dermatitis in dogs. It went on the market, was a blockbuster, and then it was unavailable for a long, long, long time because Zoetis didn't anticipate the demand that this product would have. And so the approved product is oclacitinib maleate, but there was an oclacitinib citrate API available, and many folks started compounding the citrate salt. Oclacitinib citrate does not have the bioavailability and the duration of action that the maleate salt does. And so there were some therapeutic failures with that, unfortunately. I hope you know about the banned list for food-producing animals. Chloramphenicol, metronidazole, clenbuterol are very bad actors in humans, and so you don't want to compound anything that might end up on somebody's dinner plate. And then a big one that has been around in the original guidance and is still a huge no-no is using an API to prepare a drug that's restricted for human distribution under REMS. And I've provided the links here so you can go see what today's menu of REMS drugs is, but the ones that FDA gets really upset about are isotretinoin and mifepristone. Those are the ones that FDA gets really upset about if you try to provide those. Mycophenolate, I know folks have compounded mycophenolate using an approved product to start with, like they make an oral solution out of the injection. That is not as scary to FDA, but if you use the API for that, you're asking for trouble to do that. So I'll close. We've got a little bit of time left for questions here, but in summary, use approved products for compounding when you can get them from a verifiable source, when stability for the exact product that you're compounding is supported by evidence, when dosage forms are appropriate, meaning they're not toxic to that patient and they are appropriate for the route of administration, and you can work with them to get what you want in terms of quality. Make sure the excipients are appropriate to support stability of the compound. I mentioned those film coatings on Zoetis products. Surfactants, as Dr. K mentioned yesterday, can cause some destabilization and potentially particle size growth over time. And again, make sure the excipients themselves are not toxic to the target patient. If you're not going to use an approved product and you're going to use an API, make sure that, again, that you can answer yes to all of these questions, that I can't get it. Even if I could, it's not appropriate for this compound and this patient. I have a formula that says the stability using an API is evidence-based. And even if an approved product is available, I have a narrow therapeutic index drug in a tiny, tiny patient, and I really need some precision here, so I'm going to use the API. So that's all I have for today. I'll open it up for questions. The CE code for today is B. For many of you who know me, that is not a surprise. So let me stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Gigi. Yeah, everybody, I hope you caught that. The clinical code, the CE code is B, B-E-E, as in the bumble, as in the bee, which makes total sense because you're a beekeeper, right, Gigi?
I am.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for that presentation. We do have a couple of questions here for you, and hopefully we've got about 5 minutes left. We can get some answers here. Can you explain FDA's import alert system and how it impacts obtaining APIs?
Sure. I had hoped that Eric would explain that a little bit more yesterday because he is certainly more knowledgeable about that and trying to stay off of that import alert list. But so FDA basically has 3 levels of an import alert. The red list is folks that they have identified that have problems. They either refuse to be inspected, or they failed inspections, or they've sent adulterated products into the country. And FDA puts them on a red list, which means that FDA doesn't even have to inspect it and prove that it's bad. They can just stop it right at the border. So you don't want to order anything from a red listed supplier. A green listed supplier means that there may be some import bans for a substance or a food or a cosmetic, but that particular supplier has proven that their products can meet the needs of the requirements for U.S. use, and so they get put on a green list. And so that's another way to search. If your supplier or your product is on the red list, and you might be able to find a green listed supplier that could provide that and make it through customs. And then the yellow list is something somewhere in between. They're in the process of trying to go from red to green, but slow down and proceed with caution. So I would encourage you to go to the FDA website and subscribe to those weekly updates on import alerts. I have unfortunately been the unwitting victim of that twice, where I tried to order an API from out of the country from a supplier that you guys probably get email blitzes from frequently, like I did. And I lost several $1,000s on one of those products because it hit customs and it was shut down. So be really careful with that one.
Yeah, that's for sure. You don't you don't know what goes over borders and how that works for sure. Thank you for that. We just have a couple of minutes left, but I do have a second question. What are the criteria for an exact copy of an approved product, and how do I know if what I have been asked to compound is a copy requested for economic reasons?
That is a good question. One of the rules of thumb that I like to give people is that if there is a USP product monograph, the strength for that product, that approved product, is usually plus or minus 10%. It may be narrower, but that's the definition of that drug according to US compendial standards. So if I make a 1.9 milligram chlorambucil capsule, that's really the equivalent, and it's a copy of a chlorambucil 2 milligram tablet by USP definition. What would make it not a copy would be that if you're leaving out an excipient, and an example of that case would be gabapentin oral solution. You're leaving the xylitol out because it's toxic to dogs. Another example would be the veterinarian on the prescription doesn't give you any justification for why they want you to copy this in terms of sensitivity, dosage form, or strength. They just want chlorambucil 2 milligram tablets. And so that would be when you need to ask some questions. We've unfortunately lost some cancer patients to copies of palliative chemotherapy drugs. And that's very, very, very sad when that happens.
Oh, for sure. We have a question in the chat. Thank you, Bradley. How do major wholesale club pharmacies like Costco obtain FDA-approved veterinary drugs when smaller retail stores can't? How do we get in on that action?
I bet there's something called money going on behind the scenes. I know the answer to that, Bradley. I've been trying to find that out for years. I know one way people have been successful is by having licensed veterinarians on their staff or in their corporation. I don't recommend that. That is not something that you want to do, is hire a veterinarian just to get drugs. I think the way around that is to continue to lobby the FTC to look at this. It is restricted distribution. Pharmacists are being trained in veterinary pharmacy now much more than they were 10, 15 years ago. And I think this is a political battle that needs to be fought at the state and maybe federal level. I worry about anything fought at the federal level, but at the state level for sure.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
Wow, Gee, thank you so much. What a great presentation and so informative. We really, truly appreciate that.